Is there such a thing as a fiduciary financial advisor in Canada?
I'm going to say sort of. In Canada, this is such a, I need a law degree to answer this question well, Sam. And what we're seeing a lot of in the financial services space is where we work with somebody on that sort of trust foundation, but that doesn't necessarily actually mean that person is trustworthy.
Welcome into the Millennial Money Canada podcast. This is episode number 15. My name is Sam Lichtman. I'm going to be your host today. This is a really exciting episode because we have someone who has played a really big role in my life coming on this podcast today to walk our listeners through how to choose the right financial advisor for you. We're really going to navigate the Canadian financial landscape today. We're going to learn what questions to ask financial advisors. We're going to learn red flags to watch out for. And we're going to go in depth with one of the leading financial planning industry experts, Jason Watt. Jason is an instructor, an educator, and a consultant for financial advisors. He has shaped the financial advisory industry in Canada through his technical training and expertise. And so I'm really thrilled to have Jason on here today. With that, let's get into the episode, number 15, Navigating the Canadian Financial Landscape. All right, Jason, thanks for joining the Millennial Money podcast today.
Always a pleasure, Sam. Big fan. Love all your social media stuff and what you're doing, working with millennials. You know, I like a niche, all that good stuff, Sam. So
I appreciate
thanks.
that. Well, I've got to return the thanks a little bit because I don't know how many people know this, but I used a lot of your content to help actually get to where I am in terms of studying the curriculums in CFP and even LLQP when I was pretty young in the industry. So you've had a pretty big impact on my career, and I'm actually really excited that you're here today. I didn't ever think it would come to this point of actually being able to have this conversation. So I'm very excited for it.
It's one of my favorite things, Sam, is the ability to have had that sort of fingerprint on people's careers. So I appreciate that. That's really nice to hear. Thank you.
Well, I'm really excited to have you on because I think you have such a unique expertise in the financial advice space. And I want to approach this more from a client perspective, and having someone like you on here to talk about the financial advisor space, the different regulations and things to watch for, all of those things, I think is going to be really cool to be able to just dive right into that. And so I guess we can start with where people should look to find financial advisors, because in the past it's felt like, if I'm talking about myself, go to my parents will tell me, oh, you know what, I've got a good guy, go see them, or it's done through referral, those types of methods. And the trust relationship is inherently there, but maybe not always the expertise, competency, or even a unique understanding of the individual situation is there. So where should people start looking at this space to find a financial advisor?
Yeah, I think this is actually an increasingly challenging question. You know, there was a time when, if we rewind 40 years ago, for example, then you probably did exactly what you're talking about, Sam, right? There was really no other way than via either a referral or you meet somebody at a service club or something like that. And you mentioned trust in here, and trust is so important. I think that there is a good opportunity today via social media, and I know you're super active on at least a couple of big social media platforms. I think there is a good opportunity to kind of get to know somebody, to learn their cadence and learn what they present publicly, at least. I think that's opened up another way to access an advisor. I do get a little bit nervous about referral arrangements sometimes. And this, I think we're going to chat about this a little bit later on too. If I'm working with somebody as an advisor, I'm going to sort of understand that person's circumstances. And then if I bring another person on via referral, probably there's some overlap there. So I probably have some competency, but those two people haven't really communicated about their financial situations. Mm-hmm. May be vastly different people, right? Even if it's two physicians or whatever the case is. So I find that's a little bit of a gap. And then the other issue here, and what we're seeing a lot of, maybe not a lot, but enough of to be painful in the financial services space, is where we work with somebody on that sort of trust foundation, but that doesn't necessarily actually mean that person is trustworthy, right? There's a story in the Globe and Mail just yesterday about somebody who did a lot of referral business, raising money in the film and TV production space in Canada, and it blows up. But that was all referral, that was all trust, and there's somewhere in the neighborhood of $500 million raised there, of which a significant portion now is unaccounted for. So I don't know, Sam, the trust thing, it's great. We have to have trust from our clients. Absolutely agreed. But I certainly have seen enough cases of that blowing up. And I think as we go through this, we're going to maybe dissect that a little bit more. So maybe that's not, I haven't given an answer, I think, Sam, but let's keep going.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I think when we're talking about referral arrangements, you can even dive a little deeper in there, because referrals could be like a friend you meet for coffee. It could also be my mortgage broker has someone they typically refer their clients to. And I think in some cases, when other professionals are referring, there could be even a little bit more, I would assume, at least when we have our partners that we refer people to, we've done the due diligence to verify that those people are in a good space to actually be able to advise in those situations. You'd hope that trust would exist a little bit more there in those situations too. But yeah, when it's like a personal referral, you don't know if that person, and I've experienced this a few times too. Like I've had a client where we've had to fix a lot of what a trusted referral like did in terms of like messing up a business situation, insurance situations, all of those things. I'm sure you've seen that, 10 times for every one time I've seen it. But those can be you hit the nail on the head with like, yeah, you trust the person, but that doesn't mean they're good at what they do. That doesn't mean they know the individual situation. And I think that's a big issue.
It's a problem in sales in general, right? In sales, we gain trust first and foremost. It doesn't necessarily mean that person is acting in your best interests, or that person is recognizing their own conflicts of interest, or all those issues. Yeah.
And you mentioned social media. And so social media is opening a bit of a Pandora's box here with finfluencers and all of those things, which I think I want to dive in that a little bit later. But I've obviously been active on social media, and I've seen kind of the good and the bad that it can bring to the table. One of the good things I really like, though, is that there's a lot of good information out there, right? And so when someone's not trying to sell you something with a video, if they're just doing financial education, there's a lot of good people out there doing that. You can learn a lot before actually going to someone to actually help with your financial situation too.
Absolutely. Sorry, Sam. Absolutely. There's an unlimited amount of information out there. It does get to be a challenge again for the consumer to dissect the good from the bad, right? That's, not all the, and, I pick on yesterday, I saw something on Twitter that, was clearly a securities recommendation, what I thought was a way offside securities recommendation from somebody who should know better and is certainly in a sort of trusted position. I don't know how you win now as the consumer. It's really challenging.
It really is. And I think that leads nicely into another point here, which is sometimes when you go see the person that you want to see, the financial advisor that you want to see, you realize that maybe we're not a good fit to work together. So kind of going down that road. And then it leaves you with, let's take some underrepresented demographics into the picture here. So let's say millennials or Gen Z or people who aren't making six figures, don't have six figures to invest. It leaves them with an interesting, a frustrating problem, I would say. Yeah. Because it seems like, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, it can seem like there's an advice gap in Canada. Now, I know there's a lot of different research and topics out there about how many advisors actually exist in Canada per capita, and it doesn't seem like there should be an advice gap. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on where, like, and why this problem is existing, because it doesn't seem like people at these underrepresented areas are actually getting good advice or any advice at all.
Yeah, I think there's a few different sort of demographics here. There's like a millennial couple where both of them are earning somewhere between 80 and 120,000, maybe even 70 and 120,000, like in that ballpark. and they have got no assets saved up, and they have a mortgage, and they have a couple of young kids, so they're not going to save any money anytime soon, or not save anything substantial. That is a tough one to deliver advice to, and they need advice. They're at a point where the decisions they are making now are going to have impact 20, 30, 40 years from now that they don't necessarily recognize. That's a tricky one. New Canadians, you have, again, a couple new Canadians. They might be a little bit older or might not have kids yet, but again, often they're going to be focused on sending money home, or they're not necessarily rolling into those great paying jobs right away. So lots of underserved demographics here, sort of the missing middle, if I can steal from an urban planning definition. And that group, I think we're starting to crack that nut a little bit. And I think you're doing some of this work, Sam, so that's good. You're only kind of two people between you and Guillaume, but I know there are others doing it. I see some, I think, pretty good subscription models here. I'll point to Owen Winkelmolen over with his advice.com or I think it's advice.com, whatever.
Yeah, with two eyes. Advice with two eyes.
Advice
Yeah.
with two eyes, yeah.
Yeah.
Where I think Owen has a tool there that's going to allow financial advisors and financial planners who want to serve that market to be able to do more of it. But it is a tricky one. I don't think it's going to be obvious, and it's a double-edged sword, or maybe there's two sides to this, where I think those folks in that situation are often going to be so focused on their situation, and they're not going to feel like they have money to invest, which is going to deter them from going to seek financial advice. And then on the other side, they're not, I'm going to say, sort of top-tier clients, and that's going to also keep the industry from actively pursuing them. So I think unless you have a model that really finds a way to work with and service those clients, it's going to continue to be tricky. I do see it starting to open up, but I think we're very early days for that, Sam. You think I'm right there?
Yeah, and I think I was reading FPAC's article on the advice gap myth, where it talks about comparing like the UK and Australia and how we have one advisor for every 380 Canadians approximately. I think those stats are always a little bit changing, but and that's definitely something that should be doable. Advisors should be able to service 380 people in some capacity, right? And so is there actually an advice gap, or is there a competency gap? Because one of the things I've seen too is those people getting targeted from advisors with bad advice that doesn't necessarily, and I get the understanding, right? Because you're a new advisor in the industry, you have to make money. You have to make money in that space. And what's the quickest way to do it? Well, it's to sell insurance products, segregated funds, those types of things that pay upfront commissions. And so without kind of bashing those products too harshly, what ends up happening is because those people are naturally underrepresented, they're the ones that come for advice to those places, and they get sold something that doesn't actually meet their needs potentially. I see that happening so often. I see things like, an example. I had a client who came to me who had let's say $10,000 in an RSP, not a lot of money, right? They were newer to Canada, and the advisor put their 10 grand in a segregated fund inside of an RRSP, even though they weren't making very much money, and they put it inside the RRSP. And I asked the client, well, why did they do that? And they said, well, the advisor said it was better for estate planning. And so for everyone listening here, segregated funds in a non-registered account, you can name a beneficiary on, but in an RSP, you can already name a beneficiary on an RSP. You don't need segregated funds to be able to bypass that. So it was a nonsensical piece of advice, which my assumption was driven by the upfront commissions paid on that product. So it's a tricky problem to navigate, because the advice industry isn't really like the law industry or the accounting industry, where you have internships and then associate roles and then moving up in the ladder and getting paid well to do it. There is a lot of us out there that kind of have to start with eat what you kill. Find something, sell it, and sell it to whoever will buy it. And I think that's a problem here.
Yeah, I agree. I would love to see a proper internship or externship model in the financial services space in Canada. We're starting to see a little bit of that in the United States now, and that, early days there still, but they're definitely ahead of us.
Cool.
I think you're right, though, Sam, that it's very challenging if you're going to come into this business. And we do have this tilt towards self-employment or entrepreneurship, which I think it means very much that eat what you kill mentality is alive and well. Yeah, I'd love to see where senior advisors are more willing to bring junior advisors in, junior advisors more willing to go and work somewhere for a few years to sort of learn the business. But we're just not there yet. I don't know exactly what the solution is here, but I think that we need some sort of a broad scale, well accepted, again, whether internship or externship or some sort of a model in which the junior can go to work in a safe environment where they don't necessarily have to the extent you're talking about, eat what you kill.
Yeah. And I think with those internships comes a lot of experience in seeing the harm that bad advice does. And I don't think people get that when they are just starting like I started. I started in this industry, like in the wealth management industry at 21 years old, right? I had some prior experience in banking, but I was so green. I was listening to whatever advice anyone would tell me, right? And so I don't know how I honestly, like looking back, I think having maybe the right approach to ethics probably helped me a lot along the way in terms of not falling into that just sell a product that pays you the most commission mentality. I think having some good mentors along the way too helped as well. Let's move on to a topic that I guess kind of fills in nicely with this. So let's say you are that client that gets referred to someone, and you're trying to figure out, can this person actually help me? Right? You're not. I'm a client. I'm not an expert in financial planning, in investment products and insurance products, and so I need someone I can trust. I need someone that will guide me in the right direction. I'm willing to learn, but I know I'm not going to ever get to that level. So, what should I be looking for as a client to actually talk to my advisor and ask them the right questions? So let's kind of go with like questions you should ask a financial advisor, things you should look for, those types of areas.
Right. It's a big topic, and there's no way that I'm going to capture everything here. I think one of the things that we should be asking about, though, is, have you dealt with people in a similar situation to mine previously? What experience do you have here? I want to be very cautious about exciting promises. So, I believe that good financial advice is generally going to lead to getting rich slowly. Now, I know that there's little things we can do. Sometimes there's a tax lever we can pull here and there to put a little bit of extra money in somebody's pocket. But for the most part, and I know it's a hard thing to come to terms with, so much of social media today, we see these meme coins or whatever floating around. Yeah. I really think that the financial planner who, I don't want to say promises, but the financial planner who promotes the idea of kind of, get rich slowly, make good decisions, avoid big mistakes, leave optionality, find connection between your values and how your money works. Those are the things that I would be looking for. So I think, Sam, it's, again, you're never going to get everything exactly right, but, have you worked with people like me, or how have you helped people like me, some version of that, the sort of boring, get rich slow thing, and then somewhere in there finding some alignment between my money and my values. Those are the things that I like, and I know those aren't going to ring true for everybody, but I think it is important. I think this is something we can just generally be better at, whether it's financial advice or, car buying or whatever, but just what am I actually trying to get out of this relationship? What questions should I be asking before I'm sitting down from that person across from me?
And okay, so if I'm a client in this situation and I'm saying, okay, like I'm an entrepreneur, here's my financial situation, I'm married, I have a son, you worked with clients in the past, would you go further than that? Would you say, okay, explain to me some strategies that you would potentially implement here? Would you kind of wait and feel that out through a data gathering process? I'm just trying to get at like, well, I understand where you're coming from in terms of, okay, have you worked with people like me before? Often that still doesn't necessarily boil down to, can you help me, just because you've worked with people like me before. So there's potentially other areas we could explore within that vetting process of a financial advisor. So I'm curious, like, what other important areas would you point to say, are they qualified? What is their conflict of interest, or how do you deal with conflicts of interest? Those types of things.
Yeah, and that's where we really can open that conversation up quite broadly, right? So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, and I don't know, Sam, exactly how far we want to go with that sort of line of questioning, but I do think that it's important to see that that person has a process. So, I don't necessarily want to focus on the recommendations that that person delivers. I think there's a few other things. So, I want to see that they will help me in a manner where they're getting a clear look at my situation, and we're not, overlaying too much from everybody else. So I don't like cookie cutter approaches
Mm-hmm.
to delivery of financial advice. I think I want to make sure that that person is held to or holds themselves to some sort of an ethical standard. Now that's a tricky one, because I see this kind of thing happen where people do say, I have this set of ethical standards to which I will adhere. Um, it's really tough until you actually have an ethical dilemma to know how that person is going to respond to it. I think, though, that things like taking that relationship slowly and carefully, I think not overpromising, those are I
Yeah.
think, kind of early ethical cues that I can follow. But I think it's really hard to look at what somebody has on their website or the letter they give me in writing, or even what I've heard from the person who referred them, or whatever the case is. I think it's really hard to know how that person is going to behave where there's a conflict of interest. So I think we can look at the small things that are happening early in the relationship, and maybe that's our best indicator. I don't know, Sam. What do you? You're
Yeah.
delivering advice. What do you do to communicate that you're ethical?
Yeah, it's a good point. And I guess for me, I definitely bring in front of the clients, like, in some cases, sample plans to show them this is the type of advice we've delivered before. And for clients in similar positions, right? We've got sample plans for business owners. We've got sample plans for employed clients, tech clients, those types of things. And this is our deliverable for the financial plan. And this is what you get, essentially. And so we have a bit of a unique approach. I know everyone doesn't take this approach, but we do the financial plan and then the investment management secondary in terms of the actual introductory process. My thoughts are you accredited? Like, what are your accreditations in terms of your designations, your experience in the industry, your target? Like, this is who we work with, those types of things. What ethical standards are you held to in the context of licensing bodies, designating bodies? Like, clients need to know in my opinion, clients need to know their protections that they have if something were to go wrong, and their recourse for that. Those are a few things that I've always kind of brought to the forefront of client relationships. Now, I'm also saying this with an element of bias from my perspective, because these things are important for me to communicate. I don't always know if the client cares all that much in the context of what accrediting bodies we're a part of, or what memberships we hold, and those types of things. It does sometimes feel to me that clients are more interested in, can you help me, and can you be a sounding board for my decisions so I don't make bad decisions, and am I actually on track to getting where I'm going? Those. So I often think, am I over explaining this? Do clients actually care what standards we're held to? Those types of things. But I have heard quite frequently from people, and part of groups that I'm like social groups that I'm a part of, and then social media groups that I'm a part of. Whenever someone asks, hey, can you recommend a good financial advisor? The first comment that always shows up is, find someone who's a fiduciary. Find someone who is obligated to act in your best interests. And you could probably speak to this a lot more in depth than I could. Is there such a thing as a fiduciary financial advisor in Canada?
I'm going to say sort of.
Okay.
This is a tricky question, and this is something that I think has bled over maybe from the United States or the UK. So in the United States, there are lots of situations where somebody delivering financial advice is held to a fiduciary standard. In Canada, and this is such a, like, I need a law degree to answer this question well, Sam. But in Canada, if you are a portfolio manager, a registered portfolio manager, so this is a category of securities registration where you have discretionary authority, and that's typically a hallmark of a fiduciary relationship. So discretionary meaning somebody gives you their money and then you are doing something with that money. This is really discretionary. That portfolio manager does have a fiduciary duty with respect to the management of those dollars, but not necessarily with respect to any other component of that relationship. So you're not, when, if that portfolio manager is delivering estate planning advice or insurance recommendations or broader financial planning advice, those do not by default fall into a fiduciary standard. We're good so far?
Yeah, that's where I think there's so much confusion because, okay, so number one, to be a portfolio manager, you have to be registered with, you have to be registered properly. So you have to have your CIM or you have to have your CFA. And that's a discretionary portfolio manager in that context.
Right.
And essentially what you said there, like, if I'm a discretionary portfolio manager, give me your money. I'm going to make the investment decisions with your money with like kind of a template that we've talked about. And I'm going to make these decisions. Now, these decisions are going to have to be in your best interest. And that's it. But when I'm talking about a financial plan, that's not covered under this. So is financial advice covered under this? Well, maybe if you include investment portfolio management as a part of financial advice, then a component of it would be, if I can kind of reiterate what you're saying. But the whole financial advice relationship is not governed by that same fiduciary standard, if I understand that correctly.
I think you have that right. Now, the other thing is that we'll often want to find it. I don't think it's a must, but I think it's very good to find somebody who has a financial planning certification. So whether that's the CFP or the RFP, there is the PFP. It's a little bit lighter and doesn't, I think, necessarily carry the same weight. But CFP to me is kind of that's the table stakes for the delivery of competent financial advice. That said, as I mentioned, you will run into good financial advisors who don't carry CFP certification for any of a number of reasons. And you'll run into people who carry the CFP certification who are delivering very poor financial advice. That you certainly run into both ends of that. The CFP certification does not by itself open you up to a fiduciary standard. There's a very narrow set of rules within the CFP standards of professional responsibility where if you are handling somebody else's money, which is very rare for a financial planner, that you do have a fiduciary obligation there. But fundamentally, I'm going to say that a CFP does not, by default, have a fiduciary obligation. Now, the RFP is a little bit different here, and I think, as you well know, Sam, the RFP is guided by the Institute of Advanced Financial Planners, and they have introduced for their members a standard that says you will hold yourself out as a fiduciary. Mm-hmm. Now, this doesn't, I'm going to say by default, make you a fiduciary, but if a client sues somebody and we end up in court, often what's going to happen is the client's lawyer is going to want to prove that other entity, that advice giver, is a fiduciary, because typically then the awards will be higher, the awards for damages will be higher, and it'll be easier to get those awards. Mm-hmm. So that lawyer is going to make these arguments in court to say, look, this person was a fiduciary. And if I have a website or I gave a letter to the client that uses the F word, says, I'm a fiduciary, then it's going to be pretty easy for that lawyer to make that argument, which again just means larger damage awards and an easier time for the courts to give those damage awards. Is that helpful, Sam? I don't know if that makes sense.
Absolutely, absolutely, it is. So advisors can, in essence, potentially hold themselves out as a fiduciary. Because fiduciary elevates it to a legal standard, versus if I just have a suitability standard, which not to overcomplicate this here, but one of the things I talk to people about in my industry and clients about is, in many cases, advisors are not obligated to provide you with products that are the best products for you, but they are obligated to provide you with products that are suitable products for you. So do they meet your risk tolerance? Do they meet your time horizon? Do they meet your goals and those types of things? And so when we look at, let's say, someone who has a high risk tolerance and who wants to see their money grow, an advisor could justifiably, under the suitability standards, say, option A, here's an actively managed mutual fund charging you 2 or 1% on MER, and I get 1%. Option B, here's a segregated fund. Option C, here's an index fund. Right? All three of those have very different mandates inside of those products and are potentially suitable in different situations. But sometimes, if, like I kind of mentioned earlier, if the advisor is more motivated to sell a product that earns commission, they may go with the segregated fund and not be in violation of their suitability clause, even if that's not the perfect fit for you, even if an index fund would have made more sense. And that's kind of the problem here when we're talking about, okay, clients are asking, where do I go and how do I know if I'm getting good advice? I really wanted to just stress that, because there's so many different tiers of actual, due diligence and also client delivery that advisors can give you that may be suitable for you, may not be the right fit for you though.
And it's a good point, right? You're right here that operating under a suitability standard, probably all three of those answers are right. Operating under a fiduciary standard, you would have to demonstrate that of those three things, there was a valid reason. I could sit down and I could write out a rationale for why I chose whichever one over the other two, right? It is quite challenging. And it's hard from the consumer perspective, because how sophisticated do you have to be before you recognize what has gone into the recommendation that the advisor sitting across from you, what that person has thought about here, right?
Yeah, and this is what I received a really nice text from, or actually I was on the phone with this guy from a client the other day, and he was saying, I send all your podcast episodes to my kids, and because like they don't listen to dad, but they'll listen to people who are actually in the industry. And so I think it's important to have these conversations, because if this reaches the right people to know, okay, if I'm going into an advisor meeting, I kind of want to know like why they're going to recommend me A, B, or C. And I want to actually make sure I'm asking the right questions. I have the information to make an informed decision here. It goes back to, well, I trust this person because he's worked with my friends or colleagues, but is that trust merited? Is that trust something I should then instill in this person as well? And so that's kind of where I'm going with this.
And I think that takes us right back to the beginning, right?
Yeah.
It's really that those kids, this person you're having this conversation with, those kids get so much exposure to you. They really get to understand how you think through problems. That to me is one of the advantages of doing this kind of thing, right? Doing podcasts and doing social media and all that, Sam, right? That it gives the client a little bit more opportunity to know, I don't have to necessarily know the difference between seg fund, mutual fund, active index fund, whatever, but I do get the opportunity to see that, Sam is thoughtful about his relationships with clients. Sam thinks through why the client has costs and what those costs are worth and so forth, right? going back to the, am I getting the right fit with this advisor? That is one of the advantages here, right? Is that you get that
Yeah.
that parasocial engagement, right? So
Yeah, and so I think this leads nicely into another part of what I want to discuss with you today, and that is I want to frame this like red flags maybe to look at with financial advisors, but more generally, when we're sitting down with people, when we go through financial plans, our financial plans are not conceptualized. They're not a part of like an infinite banking concept or those types of things. This has ramifications and it's introduced because it's easy to market, right? Easy to market services. It's hard. I was having a conversation with my wife yesterday. It's really hard to market good financial planning because you can't guarantee a result. You can't equate a dollar value all the time to the advice you're delivering. I was saying like, man, like it would be so nice if you could put a dollar value on a deep breath after finding out you can retire, right? But it's a really hard thing to market. But what's really easy to market is a concept like be your own bank, infinite banking, those types of things, where the financial plan is all built around this concept that sounds really good. So I'd love to dive a little deeper into some of those things where these concepts that are in the advice industry in general, in the investment industry with like private equity and these types of things, in the insurance industry with these different types of concepts. I know you've got so much experience in these areas and you've dealt with all kinds of people who promote different things as well. So when a client's walking into one of these meetings, what are some things that should really raise a red flag? And we can even dive into some of the individual concepts too, if you want to.
yeah, I don't know if we need to go into the individual concepts, but if you want to cover off some of them, I'm fine.
Yeah.
I think the first thing is the cookie cutter approach, right? So if you say that everybody who walks into my office is going to walk out with the same solution, well, that just doesn't make sense, right? This is not it's not appropriate. Clearly, in that case, you're not building the plan to accommodate. I talked earlier about matching values to how your dollars are deployed. Clearly, you're not thinking about things like, what if that person becomes a non-resident at some point? What if you end up with, your grandchildren suddenly unexpectedly in your care when you're in your 50s, like I am right now, right? All these what ifs that really blow up people's financial lives. You have to build the financial plan to that person's individual circumstances. So that's my first. My second, Sam, the other thing that I want to flag here, and I'm going to start with rates of return. It makes me so very nervous. I know there are places where it's appropriate, and sometimes we need to have models and so forth. But if somebody sort of leads with a rate of return or leads with and you said it, it's so difficult to quantify something like, oh, I can relax a little bit about my retirement plan. But if somebody leads with quantifying those outcomes, that makes me so nervous. So whether it's a rate of return or whether it's, and you had a good post about this actually the other day on social media about those sort of advisor value studies and how those can be a little bit misleading. If you're saying I'm going to, make you 2.5% better off than your peers who don't work with me, that's a really tricky claim to, I think, make to sort of crystallize. So I think, the cookie cutter thing and leading with that kind of rate of return. And you're right. It's so very difficult, Sam, to sell the value proposition of financial planning, which Carl Richards does this well. Carl Richards talks about fundamentally all financial planning comes down to, am I going to be okay? Well, how do I put a dollar sign or a percentage on that?
Yeah. And I think that's like, there's obviously cases where clients are, hey, I have a problem. I need a solution to this problem. What's the solution? And you can kind of get very granular in your details there. But there's so much of it where it's like, okay, I don't know if I'm on the right track. I've made these decisions. I'm not sure if they're the right ones. And And there's some of that you can quantify. You can quantify the value of good tax planning, for example. You can and because you can literally scenario A, scenario B, here's the difference, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, in so much of the general financial planning concepts, I've had to undo a lot of poorly put together plans that the first thing the advisor told the client when they sat down was, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z for you, like I did for your friend. I'm going to, you're going to become your own bank. You're going to do these types of things, which in my mind, again, if you're selling a concept, if you're selling something that's based around, and even though it sounds like it could be like kind of like financial planning, it's not. It's based on a product. That's something to be aware of as well. So like when if client walks into a meeting and the first thing they hear is, well, we're going to get you set up with this policy. We're going to get you set up with this. And in this way, you're going to be your own bank and look at the outcomes, right? Well, okay, but maybe you haven't actually heard my situation yet. And maybe this isn't the right fit for me. And how do I know that you've taken all the variables into consideration? And one of the things I like to do, because we deal with all kinds of different clients and all kinds of different life situations, we want to compare and contrast different options to clients about, if you go with option A, here's your likely or expected or median outcome, right? If you go with option B, here's this outcome. Here's the pros and cons of option A. Here's the pros and cons of option B. And you want to make sure that your advisor gives you the information while still acting in a role as an advisor and saying, this is my recommendation to you based on everything you've told me. And I feel like if that conversation doesn't happen, where they've learned about you, they've learned about your goals, they've learned about your values, they've learned about the things that matter to you and where you want to go in life, recommendations prior to that conversation should be looked at very skeptically.
Yeah, I think that mirrors my comment about cookie cutter. And you said earlier too, right? That if you're not, again, getting a financial plan that matches your circumstances, then it's not really a financial plan.
Yeah. You do a lot of consulting for financial advisors now, and you've been so integral in the education of financial advisors in the past. I'm curious, when you're talking to financial advisors, do you are you focusing on how they can deliver value to clients and those types of things? Or like, what does that look like for you? Because I think that plays into as well when clients are going to see a financial advisor, how they present themselves, how they communicate that stuff. What are you focused on with the consulting that you're currently doing?
Yeah, that's a good question, Sam. I'm going to say that my kind of ideal consulting client is already pretty focused on delivering good financial advice, right? I really like to see a good process here. And there's not one way to do this. There's, I think a good example of this is, I know some advisors who will do tax returns this time of the year, right? Who will do tax returns for their clients. And I think that can bring a lot of value, and that can sort of open up the door to some really good tax planning conversations. I don't think you need to do that. So to my mind, the sort of delivery of good financial advice is, what am I, and you're right, like it's client centric. So what am I trying to achieve for the client? And then back off from there. And what are we doing between everything, right? From our marketing to how our office looks, to the ways that our staff interacts with these folks, to if I'm not in a physical office, then your Zoom or however you're digitally interacting with your clients. What software do you use? There's no sort of area there that I think you don't touch. Again, in my perfect world, the sort of client, the advisors that I'm working with are pretty far along with that stuff, and it's just a matter of closing out some gaps. I certainly have seen people who are not that far along with it, and it's challenging because I'm going to say folks like yourself, Sam, where you've paid attention, you watch trends, you see what's happening in the US, you talk to other advisors, you're more likely to just sort of at the coal face be further ahead Whereas if you've got somebody who's been fairly insular, hasn't gone out and talked to others, you're not going to typically, and it's not impossible, but you're typically not going to have sort of that more evolved client process. So I don't know. For me, Sam, I like to
Yeah.
work with somebody who's a little bit further along, right? Like I would much rather work with somebody like yourself, who is um, who's exposed to the broader industry, who I know is not, so narrowly inward looking,
Yeah.
versus the person who has chosen that really, just to say, I'm only going to do what the firms I work with sell me, and kind of not get out there and talk to others.
And you mentioned a couple times like how important a process is. I think it's important for advisors to have a process, but for clients to also understand that process. And we're talking about a process too. Like it has to be more than sit down. Do we like each other? Here's your portfolio.
Yeah.
Right. And going down that road of, again, like what clients should be looking for, and even how you coach clients, and maybe they have a process, maybe you refine it, maybe they don't, and you build it for them, those types of things. Having that process does so much, adds so much value. And we've found that since we've implemented like a really structured onboarding process, a really structured financial planning process, we've been really able to deliver more value in a more timely manner for clients, and things don't get lost along the way. And that's another side, right? Like there's so many different angles to this, because like you could be working with someone who's a good advisor, but who's working with 500 clients. And if there isn't a process in place for that, you're going to be, number 380 of 500. And things could get overlooked even if you're working with a good advisor. So having, like, even I think drawing back to that, like, yeah, if like ask people about their process, like what's the onboarding look like? What's the financial planning look like? Can you walk me through your processes? I think that's so important as well.
And I think you brought a couple things to my mind here. Another question that I think is good to ask is not just what does it look like when you're working with somebody like me, but also who have you turned away? So what clients have come to you where you, the advisor, have said, I don't think this is going to be a good fit.
Mm-hmm.
And then ideally you refer them to somebody else, send them to somebody where they are a good fit. And you touch on the number of clients thing, which I should have thought about earlier, Sam, sorry, is if you're working with 500 households, it's not impossible to deliver some, reasonable service there, but you shouldn't be working with an advisor who works with 500 households and expect to be getting robust financial planning outcomes based on that. There's this concept, and I know you know this, the Dunbar number, which says we can maintain about 150 relationships in our lives. So if I'm working with a financial advisor who chooses to work with more than 150 clients, then as you say, I'm number 398. Well, I know that person has to look in their CRM, their customer relationship management tool, before I meet, so they remember my name and my spouse's name and all. Like they're not probably, I'm not one of their 150. And I know social science being what it is, it's going to be more and less for some people. But if I'm 398 on that list, well, I know that I'm not getting that sort of personalized advice. I'm not getting that person who knows sort of automatically who I am. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's so important. I want to shift to our last point here, which is, where do you see an advisor's value lie now? And Jason, you've had so much experience like talking advisors through technical concepts and all of this stuff to become like actually competent at their job. But so many times I hear like, I actually saw a post on this from someone on LinkedIn where it was, if your advisor is going to put you in index funds, then you shouldn't be working with that advisor, right? Because they should be doing more. And I'm thinking like, okay, like we have a market that's moving towards low cost ETFs and index funds. There's a lot of evidence suggesting that's the right way to move. As a financial advisor, whereas in the past and in the evolution of the industry, maybe my role 30 years ago was picking the right mutual funds for clients, and keeping them invested, right? While the keeping them invested part is still really important and still a critical role in advisors today, picking the right funds. I mean, there's arguments out there that investing has been solved. So let's hypothetically accept that premise that that works, where do you see the main value lying with financial advisors today?
Yeah. So I did touch on this a bit earlier. To my mind, a financial plan or the relationship with your financial advisor should do three things, right? So avoid big mistakes, it, give me enough optionality to live my life,
Mm-hmm.
and align my values with my money. Now, I do hear the behavioral coaching argument in here, and I think this is kind of 20 years ago, right? Where, the industry got used to this idea that I had to handhold clients through volatile markets and so forth. And there is something to that, Sam. I get that. But to my mind, if you know, you're right. So first off, choosing investments almost just table stakes today. If you're not going to be using indexing or something based on indexing, I don't know. I have a hard time with that. I think there can be a place for active management, but it's gotten really, really difficult to justify it. So let's go with the investment's been solved. I have no reason to disagree with you there. And
Yeah.
then, am I handholding my client through kind of market crashes? Well, I think about in COVID, was it March of 2022,
Yeah.
if I remember right, Sam, we had a
Yeah.
little, and I saw very little actual movement away from what clients were holding. I don't know that people need that kind of advice anymore or whatever. I think that if you've set up the relationship properly, you've coached it's not hand holding through, it's prepping that person to say, just stay the course no matter what. And that's only one of many, many areas. So we look at, whatever that behavioral coaching thing, it's not just about staying invested through turbulent markets. It's in general spending less than what you make, right? Leaving a little bit of cushion, having good emergency funds, having a plan for how to deploy those emergency funds. Thinking about, I'll credit Adam Chapman here. Adam's really a leader in this space of thinking about properly spending in retirement, right? There's a whole bunch of areas where our behaviors can be better, and the advisor can help us to do that, not chasing the next shiny thing. That's a really tough one today, right? This whole FOMO in investing, it's so, and I don't see that necessarily as the same as not chasing or not getting out when the market's down or whatever. But, to my mind, a good financial advisory relationship is going to, again, help me avoid big mistakes, help me to improve or create optionality, and help me to align my values with my money. It's not just about investing. It's much, much broader than that.
Yeah, it's so broad that sometimes it's hard to communicate. And I kind of touched on this before. I've had clients that say, well, what do you mean you're not going to get me a better return than I can get get self-directed through like VEQT or Vanguard or XEQT or something like that. I have those conversations with clients all the time. And when it comes down to it is exactly what you said, right? How valuable is avoiding big mistakes? How valuable is having a sounding board for big financial decisions that can be less emotional towards your money than you are? One of the things that we've talked about as a value add, which I at first thought sounded silly, but when I said this, I'm like, wow, the way people respond to it is like, we put a brick wall between you and the sell button on your DIY investing app, right? And as funny as that is, and it's interesting too, the behavioral coaching side, I think these last 5 years in the markets, the volatility that we've seen, and this is from my perspective, having dealt with millennials, they've now been through so much market volatility in such a short period of time. And they've seen that, okay, if I get spooked by this, I'm going to lose. That's my likely outcome here. And so I think that as long as I have the risk tolerance and time horizon and capacity here, I should probably just stay invested. And that has come up a lot more, even recently with the tariffs, right? We know that's going to cause some market uncertainty, right? We know that the markets don't love uncertainty. And like, I typically proactively reach out to clients when things like this happen. The response I got when I've reached out to clients is, yeah, we've been through this before. This isn't our first rodeo. Yeah, we know what to do. And in those types of conversations, I hear your point. I didn't even think about it before, how, maybe behavioral coaching is not less valuable per se, but maybe it's not as core of a component as understanding the client's goals and values, setting them up to accomplish that, making sure that they don't do anything that will harm their ability to get there, and letting the markets do what the markets do. And yeah, that's what it comes down to. Hey,
I think so. I think if your only behavioral coaching proposition is I'll help you stay invested, I mean, I can accomplish that by losing my passwords, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Amazing. Well, this has been so cool to have you on here, Jason, and just kind of talk about these things and get your perspective on some of it. I know we have such a diverse group of listeners now too. We've had people who are in their 60s tell us they listen to our podcast. We've had 20-year-olds tell us they listen to our podcast. We have advisors tell us they've listened to their podcast. So having you on here, I feel like it really just helps bring that all together. And I'm really grateful for the role you've played in my career. And I'm sure many, many other advisors would echo that sentiment. So I appreciate having you on, Jason. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sam. I love it. I'm really enjoying watching your career progression. And can I just point out that it's kind of funny, right here, see this? And right at if you reach up over your shoulder, we have the same book right there. Yeah, it's awesome.
I tried to read through it. It's proving to be more challenging than I want to admit. But income tax act. I mean, that's good.
It's not designed to be read cover to cover. That's not a normal way to do things.
It's not a sane way to do things. I've had people tell me, "Are you insane? Are you depressed? Why are you doing this?" But yeah, awesome. All right. Well, thanks for listening to this episode, and we'll see you on the next one.